Welcome to Daily Review, your daily dose of literary exploration. We dive into books that spark curiosity and ignite growth. While our passion often leads us to nonfiction reads that empower and improve your life, no book is off limits. From gripping thrillers to insightful memoirs and compelling fiction to historical accounts, we're here to share and discuss all the interesting reads we discover. Tune in for your next great book idea.
Have you ever found yourself wondering why certain ideas, behaviors, or even illnesses spread like wildfire in one place, but then barely make a ripple somewhere else?
Yeah, or how something that seems really small, just a tiny action, can suddenly trigger this monumental shift in society.
Exactly. Today we're taking a deep dive into precisely these kinds of questions. We're dissecting the really fascinating concepts explored in a recent book. It offers, what feels like a forensic investigation into social epidemics. Our mission, as always, is to pull out the most important insights, give you a shortcut to understanding these hidden forces that are subtly shaping our world all the time. It's a great mission because this deep dive, it revisits some familiar ground, right? The whole idea of tipping points, those moments when little things suddenly make a huge difference. That idea has been around for decades.
Right, Gladwell popularized it.
Exactly. But this time, we're looking at it through a fresh and honestly a much more critical lens. We're trying to move beyond just understanding how things spread.
Okay.
The real investigative questions here are, who is actually pushing these contagions? What are their intentions? And maybe most importantly, what specific techniques are they using to kind of orchestrate these big shifts in belief and behavior?
Okay, so it's like peeling back another layer. And to crack that code, we're going to unpack three really powerful pillars, often invisible ones, that define how these epidemics actually work.
Right.
First, we'll explore what the author calls overstories, these hidden, often unspoken narratives that shape a community's reality. It's like the air they breathe.
Then there's a critical role of group proportions, this fascinating concept of the magic third, or sometimes the magic quarter.
Okay, proportions mattering numerically.
Precisely. And finally, we'll confront the pretty stark influence of superspreaders in something called the law of the few.
The law of the few.
Yeah.
Okay, and you'll see how these concepts, they help us understand everything from medical outbreaks to huge social movements, even economic crises. It's all about finding those hidden levers.
Indeed. And these aren't just, abstract theories floating around. They're the fundamental mechanisms. They dictate whether ideas, practices, even diseases either flourish or get contained.
So let's start unpacking this. It begins with a really profound observation. Contagions, they don't always spread universally. They often seem to respect community borders.
Yeah, which is weird, right? You think if something's really contagious, it should just go everywhere.
Exactly. But that's not what we always see.
A classic example, and a really baffling one, is the LA bank robbery surge back in the 1980s. I mean, this was an astounding phenomenon.
How big are we talking?
We're talking up to 2,600 robberies a year. In Los Angeles County alone, that was a full quarter of all U.S. bank robberies in those years.
Wow, a quarter.
Yeah. The FBI, just to manage it, they had to start giving the robbers nicknames. You had the Mummy Bandit, the Michael Jackson Bandit, the Village People. It was becoming theatrical.
It sounds almost like a performance art scene. Peter Houlihan, who wrote about this surge, he described it like a wildfire. He said everyone was jumping into the game.
Right. And the real tipping point seemed to come with the West Hills Bandits. On their fifth robbery, they hit a Wells Fargo vault and stole over $437,000.
That's huge money back then.
Over $1 million today. And crucially, Wells Fargo made this mistake. They actually publicized the exact amount stolen.
Oh, bad move.
Huge mistake. Because that number, that specific financial incentive, it just drew people in like this powerful magnet. Robert Sheldon Brown, known as Casper, he realized you could go into a bank and in 2 minutes get what on the streets would take you 6 or 7 weeks to get.
So the risk-reward calculation just flipped completely.
It totally flipped. It ignited this wild new wave of robbers.
But here's the puzzle then. The first anomaly we need to look at. Why did this bank robbery fever engulf L.A. so intensely, yet it largely skipped over New York City?
Right. New York had its own legendary bank robber, Willie Sutton. I mean, this guy was famous. Daring escapes, disguises. He even ended up starring in a credit card commercial later in life.
No way.
Yeah. And he claimed to have stolen what would be around $20 million in today's dollars. But despite his fame, his decades-long career, he didn't start an epidemic.
So fame wasn't the trigger.
Apparently not. New York City saw only a tiny fraction of the bank robberies that Los Angeles did. So why the difference?
Okay, so location matters intensely.
Exactly. And this is where John Wenberg's discovery comes in. It's called small area variation, and he found it in medical care. It's a really profound insight.
What did he find?
Well, back in the late 1960s, Wenberg realized that medical practices varied wildly, not based on patient need or even doctor training, surprisingly, but profoundly on where the doctor lived.
Really? Just their address?
Kinda, yeah. Doctors in, say, Randolph, New Hampshire might be super aggressive, operating on almost everyone, but then you go to a similar town nearby, like Middlebury, Vermont, and the doctors there were way more conservative.
Same types of patients, same training.
Largely, yes. It wasn't about patient demand. It was about the collective behavior, the sort of culture of the community of doctors they practiced in. He called them medical clusters. He said the doctors took on a common identity as if they had all been infected by the same contagious idea.
Wow, like a localized medical mindset.
Precisely. And it extends beyond medicine, too. Think about vaccine skepticism. Before 2015, in Waldorf schools in Contra Costa County, California, now some parents chose those schools because they were already skeptical.
Okay.
But many others developed that belief after enrolling their children. An anthropologist, Elisa Sobo, found that subsequent kids in those families, they received fewer and fewer vaccinations over time.
So the community itself changed their beliefs.
The spell of that specific Waldorf community cast this powerful shaping influence. It wasn't just individual choice anymore.
So the first big takeaway here is that these contagious events, they aren't just wild and random. They actually have a kind of discipline.
Right. They stop at community borders because there are these buried rules, these underlying assumptions and norms governing how things spread within that group. It's not random at all.
Which brings us nicely to our second puzzle, Miami. And its infamous overstory, this pervasive culture of, well, shamelessness.
Yeah, Miami's a fascinating case study. Let's consider Philippus Formes. Described as movie star handsome, drove a $1.6 million Ferrari, wore a $360,000 watch, just dripping wealth.
Okay, living large.
Massively. And he ran this enormous Medicare fraud scheme. We're talking bribing college coaches, paying out up to $400,000 a month in cash kickbacks. It was audacious.
And what's the Miami connection specifically?
Well, interestingly, his own rabbi linked his Formes' downfall directly to his move to Miami, as if the city itself played a role.
So what happened in Miami? What created this overstory?
Miami's transformation and the emergence of this pervasive culture can be traced to three really seismic events right around 1980. They basically shattered the city's existing institutional authority.
Okay, what were they?
First, the sudden, absolutely overwhelming influx of Latin American cocaine money. The underground economy in Dade County swelled to an estimated $11 billion.
$11 billion. That's staggering.
It warped everything. 20% of real estate deals were suddenly all cash. You had people literally showing up with gym bags full of bills to buy property.
Unbelievable. That much cash has to change a place.
It did. That was the second event. The drug money just seeped into the criminal justice system. It corrupted police departments, homicide vice cops. The rot went deep.
Okay. Money and corruption. What was the third?
Third was social unrest. The devastating 1979 race riots triggered massive white flight. So you combine those three things.
Drug money, systemic corruption, social breakdown.
Right. If you moved to Miami before 1980, it was, a fairly generic southern city. But if you arrived after 1980, you entered a place where institutional authority had been shattered.
The rules had changed.
Completely. Seeing like a crook in a red Chevy Citation double parked in front of a bank, unloading the millions he is laundering, that became a common sight.
Yeah.
It subtly but profoundly changed everyone's perceptions of what was legal, what was ethical. It just got ingrained in the culture.
And Medicare fraud became a symptom of this new overstory.
A huge symptom. The system back then was largely trust-based, making it incredibly easy to exploit in this new environment. Prosecutor Alan Medina remembered pharmacies popping up everywhere and patient recruiters brazenly approaching people right at bus stops.
It wasn't subtle.
Not at all. And the fraud wasn't just rampant. It was characterized by this particular, brazenness and imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Omar Perez Abar, who runs the Miami Medicare Fraud Strike Force, he shared these incredible stories.
Like what?
Like Alfredo Ruiz, a money launderer who actually rented office space upstairs from the strike force itself.
You're kidding.
Nope. And he drove a $250,000 Lamborghini Urus, constantly changing its color wrap, just flaunting it. Or scammers busing homeless people to clinics for basic vitamin B12 injections, then billing Medicare for super expensive antiviral medicines. The audacity, the shamelessness.
Wow, they weren't even trying to hide it.
Not really. Agents even visited this one place, the Fontainebleau Park Office Plaza. Looked ordinary outside. Inside, a rat's warren of small, depressing offices. Each had like one person not necessarily hoping for business, decorated with generic believe and succeed posters.
Just fronts.
Exactly. A whole network of staged fronts. One firm billed $1.2 million and then just vanished, pulled up their stakes.
And you're saying this overstory wasn't just contained to the criminal element, it permeated higher up.
Absolutely. Think about Rick Scott. He was the former CEO of Columbia HCA, a hospital chain that paid a record $1.7 billion fine for fraud. Later, he became Florida's governor and then a U.S. senator.
So the guy who oversaw massive healthcare fraud became the state's leader.
For years. While people like Philip Issoines were running their own huge schemes, it just underscores how an entire regional culture can get infected by a completely new set of implicit rules. The definition of acceptable behavior just shifts.
You know, it's fascinating how this connects to ecosystems. Communities, like natural ecosystems, seem to thrive on diversity. But when they become too uniform, too homogeneous,
They become incredibly vulnerable. Ironically, Poplar Grove is such a stark illustration of this.
tell us about Poplar Grove.
On the surface, it was the picture of perfection, a wealthy, very homogeneous community, all single-family homes, no rentals, a strongly shared value system. It had a top-ranked high school, champion sports teams, amazing theater productions. Looked idyllic.
Sounds like the dream suburban town.
It did. But underneath that shiny surface, there was this dark side, an extreme ethic of achievement that created immense, crushing pressure.
How did that play out?
Students, like one girl named Natalie, were apparently mortified by getting B's. Conversations were just consumed by AP classes, championships, college aspirations. Residents themselves called it a social grinder. The high school principal was even more blunt, describing the parents as out of their fucking mind.
Wow. Intense pressure.
Incredibly intense. And this created what the book calls a monoculture, a profound lack of crowd diversity.
What does that mean exactly? Less diversity.
Yeah, unlike typical high schools where you have distinct crowds, the jocks, the nerds, the artists, the punks, whatever Poplar Grove demanded high-achieving versions of every type. You couldn't just be the artsy kid, you had to be the award-winning artsy kid. You couldn't just be the athlete, you had to be the championship-winning athlete.
So there was no room to just be average or different in a non-high-achieving way.
Exactly. There were almost no alternatives for kids to truly deviate from this narrow path without feeling like a complete failure. The deviation from the general path was so slight that you would need an MRI to detect it.
And the consequence of this intense uniform pressure.
Tragically, it was a cluster of suicides. Alice jumped off a bridge. Then Zoe, then Stephen, then Kate, and two other boys. All from the same high school, often kids who seemed perfect on the outside.
How unusual was that rate?
Extremely. For a school of 2,000 students, a normal, though still tragic, suicide rate would be maybe 1 or 2 deaths every 10 years. Poplar Grove's reality was devastatingly different. Suicide sadly became almost normalized after it happened repeatedly.
So the homogeneity made it vulnerable.
Profoundly. The lesson is that while diversity offers cultural antibodies, different perspectives, different coping mechanisms, a monoculture has no internal defenses. Once an infection, whether it's a disease or a toxic social norm like this achievement pressure, gets inside those walls.
There's nothing to stop it from spreading.
Exactly. Poplar Grove's valued homogeneity, its perceived purity, ultimately made it tragically vulnerable.
It's chilling. And there are striking biological parallels to this, right, in nature.
Absolutely. Take cheetahs. Stephen O'Brien's research is fascinating. They look magnificent, powerful, but genetically, they're almost identical, a true genetic monoculture.
Why is that?
It goes back about 12,000 years to a severe population bottleneck, possibly down to just a single pregnant female, this forced incest over generations leading to extreme genetic uniformity.
What's the consequence of that genetic sameness?
Incredible susceptibility to disease. Melody Roll K. Parker, a veterinarian, discovered this firsthand. Feline infectious peritonitis, which is actually a coronavirus, spread like wildfire through their cheetahs after just 2 new animals arrived. It was a mini epidemic that wiped out entire cheetah colonies in other zoos, often kept secret.
So no genetic diversity meant no resistance.
Pretty much. And the Florida panther, an even more dire situation. Multiple bottlenecks, no new genetic input for centuries. Their main prey deer were decimated, forcing them to eat armadillos. Severe inbreeding led to rampant genetic defects. An astonishing 95% of their sperm were malformed. They were literally on the brink of extinction.
95%. That's almost total infertility.
It was desperate. The proposed solution was controversial. Introduce fresh blood by bringing in Texas cougars to restore some genetic diversity.
It was logical, right? Save the species.
You'd think. But there was significant opposition. Private breeders, bizarrely, valued the purity of the Florida panther lineage over its actual survival. Even a leading conservationist, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, argued to leave the animals be, believing human intervention was inherently harmful.
Wow. So they'd rather let them go extinct than mix the genes.
It seems that way for some. It raises this really important question. Why do we, as humans or societies, so often resist the very solutions that could save us, just because those solutions might compromise some perceived notion of purity, whether it's genetic purity in panthers or, social homogeneity in a town like Poplar Grove?
That's a powerful connection. Poplar Grove's social purity, its resistance to social diversity, mirrored that resistance to genetic diversity, and in both cases, the consequences were devastating.
Exactly. The refusal to embrace diversity, whether biological or social, created this profound vulnerability.
Okay, so if epidemics have these rules, these underlying mechanisms like overstories and the dangers of monocultures,
Yeah.
what does this all mean for us? Can we actually, intentionally shape them? Can we engineer tipping points?
Now this is where it gets really, really interesting. Can we become the engineers?
The genesis of this kind of thinking, this idea of social engineering, actually goes way back to the problem of white flight in post-World War II American cities.
Right. As African Americans moved north seeking opportunity, white families in many neighborhoods would rapidly move out once black families started moving in.
It was a pattern.
A predictable, devastating pattern. Russell Woods in Detroit, for example, went from all white to 90% black in just 10 years. Atlanta lost 20% of its white population in the 1960s alone, leading to that grim joke. Atlanta was the city too busy moving to hate. It was a full-blown social contagion.
People were literally fleeing difference.
Yes. And community organizers, like the famous Saul Alinsky and various academics, they desperately tried to find the trigger. They were searching for a tipping point, or what some called the magic third, a specific numerical percentage of black residents at which a neighborhood would inevitably swing or flip from white to black.
They thought there was a magic number.
They did. Initial ideas for this threshold ranged anywhere from 10-15% up to maybe 25-30%. They believed once you hit that number, rapid demographic change was basically irreversible. They were looking for the formula to predict and maybe control this contagion.
And did anyone try to, actively use this idea?
Yes. In Palo Alto, California, there was this deliberate attempt at social engineering called the Lawrence Tract Experiment. A group called the Fair Play Committee bought land with a specific plan.
What was the plan?
They established strict rules for selling the lots. They would be split equally among white, black, and Asian owners. And crucially, a black owner could only sell their lot to another black buyer, a white owner only to a white buyer, and so on.
To lock in the proportions.
How? Exactly. Their stated goal was to tiptoe up to the tipping point, but they would not cross it. They aimed to maintain a specific racial balance, preventing any one group from exceeding roughly a third of the residents.
Wow. That's explicit engineering. Did it
Well,
work?
It created a profound moral dilemma. At one point, a black family, desperate for housing in Palo Alto, wanted to buy a lot, but that specific lot was designated for a white family to maintain the carefully engineered proportions.
Oh, no. So they had to choose between their principle and helping this family.
They did, and they chose the principle. They stuck to the magic third rule to maintain their vision of racial harmony, but it caused immense grief and guilt, especially among the black members of the committee who had turned away a family in need.
It raises a huge question, doesn't it? When does social engineering, even if the intentions seem good on paper, become problematic? How far should we actually go in trying to control social outcomes?
That's the crucial ethical line, isn't it?
Yeah.
And these ideas about proportions, they weren't just limited to housing or race.
Right. The sociologist Rosabeth Kantor provided some really deep insights here, looking at corporate environments.
Exactly. She studied a company's sales force and found the power of what she called skewed proportions. It was, in her words, really, really hard to be the lone woman, the token, among, say, 10 men.
What happened to the token?
Tokens were often caricatured. They were made into symbols of their entire group. Their actual technical abilities were eclipsed by their physical appearance. They just didn't feel seen as individuals, but as representatives.
So just adding one woman wasn't enough to change the dynamic.
Cantor realized that simple integration wasn't the key. The proportions mattered immensely. Previous studies, like on juries or Israeli kibbutzim, often mistakenly attributed men's dominance simply to inherent male traits.
When it might have just been numbers.
Exactly. When in reality, it was often just due to men's numerical superiority in those specific groups. The imbalance itself created the dynamic.
And she also talked about the superperson effect, right?
Yes. When there was only one or two women or members of any minority group, their success or failure wasn't seen as normal. If they succeeded, they were treated as these exceptional superpersons like Ursula Burns or Indra Nooyi, the first African-American and Indian descent women CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, respectively.
How did that prevent change?
Because by labeling them as unique superpersons, it conveniently allowed the majority group to keep their belief systems intact. They could say, oh, she's amazing, but she's an exception. It prevented a true shift in the underlying perception about the capabilities of that demographic group as a whole. The token success didn't normalize success for others like them.
Okay, so getting beyond tokenism requires hitting a certain critical mass, this magic third or magic quarter idea.
Precisely. We see this playing out on corporate boards, for instance. While having one or two women on a board definitely helps, the real magic seems to occur when 3 or more women serve on a board together.
The magic third again.
Yeah. Women executives like Sukhinder Singh Cassidy and Katie Meredith have talked about this. Meredith said that with 3 women, she finally felt like another voice in the conversation as opposed to Katie, the female. The whole culture of the board could be suddenly transformed once that threshold was crossed.
It wasn't just about individual voices, but shifting the group dynamic itself.
Exactly. And Damon Santola's online experiment vividly demonstrated this tipping point numerically. He set up a name game where groups had to agree on a name for something.
Okay.
When a group reached a consensus, introducing a few dissidents, say 20% of the group arguing for a different name, had no impact. They were just ignored.
But what happened when the number of dissidents increased?
This is the fascinating part. When the dissidents reached precisely 25%, the magic quarter, Santola found that without fail, everybody switched to the dissident's proposed name.
Wow. Not gradually, but all at once.
Abruptly. It wasn't a slow conversion. It was a sudden, qualitative shift, which also makes these tipping points incredibly hard to predict because nothing seems to change until everything changes all at once.
That has huge implications for social change, doesn't it? You could be pushing for something and feel like you're getting nowhere.
Right. And then suddenly you hit that 25% or 33% threshold and the whole system flips. We can even see potential evidence of this in education.
How so?
Look at the racial achievement gap in elementary school math scores. Studies found that in classrooms with very few black students, less than 5%, that gap widened significantly over the school year.
Okay, a tough environment.
But in classrooms where the proportion of black students exceeded 25%, that magic quarter again, the test score gap completely vanished by the end of the year.
Completely. Just by changing the proportion.
The data suggests it. Now, altering classroom composition is obviously complex and difficult to implement logistically and politically, but the finding itself suggests that these proportional dynamics can have a real quantifiable impact on outcomes.
And we saw this with the South Asian executives too, right? The perception shifted.
Exactly. After Indra Nooyi became CEO of Pepsi in 2006, it wasn't just her. It seemed to open a door. There was a flood of people who resembled her entering the upper levels of American corporations.
It normalized it.
It did. By 2022, there were 60 CEOs of Indian descent leading Fortune 500 companies. The Wall Street Journal, when reporting on a new CEO appointment like Laxman Narasimhan at Starbucks, doesn't even mention anymore that he's Indian-born. It's just become normal. The overstory shifted. The tipping point was passed.
Okay, so if this magic third or quarter is so powerful and institutions are aware of these dynamics, how might they use it? Let's talk about Harvard. Here's a puzzle. Why does Harvard, this bastion of elite academia, need a varsity women's rugby team?
It does seem perplexing on the surface, doesn't it? Especially when you understand Harvard's 2-track process for admissions.
2-track.
Yeah. About 30% of their student body are what they call ALDCs. That stands for athletes, legacies, children of alumni, Dean's List, which often means children of major donors, and children of faculty.
Okay, so nearly a third are in these special categories.
Right. And these groups, generally speaking, have a very different path to admission. Often their grades and standardized test scores are much lower than the typical student who gets admitted purely on academic merit.
So why does Harvard prioritize, say, athletes so heavily? Their longtime dean of admissions, William Fitzsimmons.
Yeah.
What did he say?
Well, he offered some, let's say, unconvincing explanations, things like upholding collegiate tradition or valuing the commitment, drive, and energy that athletes supposedly bring.
But Harvard accepts what, like 3 or 4% of its applicants? They don't exactly need help attracting students. And surely academic or artistic drive counts too.
Exactly. It doesn't quite hold water. The true purpose, which became clearer during the Amin Khoury trial, that was the case where a wealthy parent tried to bribe a Georgetown tennis coach because, as he understood it, the athletes always get in, is about demographics.
How so?
Think about what it takes to become a national caliber tennis player or a rower or a fencer. It's incredibly expensive. Thousands just for tutoring, hundreds for rackets or equipment, constant travel. It's overwhelmingly a domain of the wealthy.
So these athletes, despite potentially lower academic stats, represent a specific desirable demographic for the university.
Wealthy families.
Largely, yes. It helps maintain a certain socioeconomic balance or perhaps imbalance, depending on your perspective. Then this is where women's rugby comes in.
How does rugby fit?
Harvard has small elite teams like tennis or fencing. But to really move the needle on maintaining those group proportions, you need sports with the same kind of socioeconomic profile, but with many, many more roster spots.
Like rowing. Rowing is perfect. Heavyweight, lightweight crews, lots of spots. But Harvard needed something new to add capacity. And in 2013, they found it. Women's rugby. How many players on a rugby team?
A lot more than tennis. Maybe 15 aside plus subs.
33 players on the Harvard women's varsity roster. 33 spots, largely filled by students from similar privileged backgrounds as the rowers and fencers.
So these large roster varsity sports are not just about sports. They're a tool.
They function as a subtle yet powerful mechanism by which Harvard maintains its group proportions, specifically ensuring a healthy percentage of wealthy, often white, students primarily from specific private and suburban high school backgrounds. It is essentially social engineering to maintain a desired demographic composition.
That puts a whole different spin on college athletics at elite schools. And it leads to some really uncomfortable territory, like in that Supreme Court case, Abigail Fisher versus the University of Texas.
Right. The university argued it needed affirmative action to achieve a critical mass of minority students for educational benefits. Okay, fair enough.
But then what happened?
Chief Justice Roberts pressed them. He asked, basically, okay, what's the number? What percentage constitutes critical mass? And the university's lawyers, these highly accomplished legal minds, just sat there, mute. They refused to defend a number.
Why wouldn't they give a number?
Because their silence was incredibly telling. It suggested an unwillingness to expose the true, perhaps uncomfortable intent behind their policies. Admitting to a specific numerical target for critical mass might reveal the delicate, maybe even awkward balancing act they were trying to achieve with proportions, potentially opening them up to legal challenges or public criticism about quotas.
It really begs the question. At what cost do we attempt to engineer society, even for goals that seem laudable like diversity? The lines get incredibly blurry very fast.
They really do. The moral and ethical considerations are profound when you start trying to consciously control social outcomes using these numerical levers.
This raises an even bigger, maybe more profound question then. Can an entire culture's overstory, that shared understanding of how the world works, be deliberately rewritten, not just maintained, but actively changed?
Surprisingly, the answer seems to be yes. And we can see a powerful example if we look at the strange rhythm of American memory concerning the Holocaust.
Strange rhythm. How so?
For years, decades even, after World War II, there was this profound silence about it in the U.S. References in textbooks were incredibly rare, sometimes euphemistic, like just mentioning concentration camps Cuban, without context.
Really? It wasn't discussed.
Not widely, no. Survivors themselves, like Renee Firestone and Lydia Bugor, often avoided discussing their experiences, even with their own children. Part of this was personal trauma, but part was also because mainstream Jewish organizations at the time actually worried about reinforcing a stereotype of Jewish weakness or victimization. They wanted to normalize the image of the Jew in America.
So the dominant overstory was one of silence, or at least downplaying.
Exactly. The term Holocaust, especially capitalized as a singular defining event, was rarely used in print until the late 1960s. The cultural narrative preferred not to confront the unspeakable horror directly.
But then something changed that.
Something huge changed it. In 1978, two NBC executives, Paul Klein and Irwin Segelstein, made a truly momentous decision. They decided to broadcast a miniseries simply titled Holocaust.
I remember that being a huge event.
It was massive, and it was 9.5 hours of unflinching, devastating television. Scenes like soldiers casually looting the bodies of victims, or that chilling line from the SS Colonel Blabel at Babi Yar. It's like eating noodles, Dorf. Once you start, you can't stop, while the camera pans over a pit filled with lifeless bodies. It was brutal, direct, and unavoidable.
What was the impact on the audience?
Absolutely unprecedented. An estimated 120 million Americans watched at least part of it. That was roughly half the country at the time.
Half the country saw this.
Yes, and the data is striking. The airing of that miniseries in April 1978 correlates precisely with a sudden, explosive increase in the usage of the capitalized word Holocaust in American print media. It was like a switch flipped. It reshaped the national memory, the national overstory, almost overnight.
Wow. It literally put the word and the concept into the mainstream consciousness.
It did. And the effect was perhaps even more electric when it aired in West Germany the following year. Despite running late at night, 15 million West Germans tuned in. It triggered this huge public outcry, a groundswell of national shame and reckoning. Neo-Nazis made bomb threats against TV stations.
And forced a confrontation.
Completely. The West German parliament was actually on the verge of letting the statute of limitations for Nazi war criminals expire. Because of the public reaction to the miniseries, they changed their minds and abolished the statute of limitations entirely. Holocaust, the miniseries, reshaped German consciousness in a way years of intellectual debate hadn't managed to.
That's incredible power from a TV show.
It really is. Larry Gross, a scholar who studied television's impact back then, explained it perfectly. He said, "It's not the media pushing this button. It's the media creating the cultural consciousness about how the world works and what the rules are."
So it wasn't just influencing opinions, it was setting the terms of the conversation.
Exactly. When such a huge portion of the population watched the same stories together night after night, it actually homogenized political opinions more effectively than individual ideology did. It created a shared reality, a shared overstory. It really underscores that, quote, "If I can write the songs of a nation, I don't care who writes their laws." We really need to pay attention to the cultural songs we're all consuming.
And this same principle, this rewriting of the overstory through media, it applies to other major social shifts too, right? Like the surprisingly swift change in public opinion on gay marriage.
Absolutely. That's another fascinating case. If you go back to the early 1980s, when activist Evan Wolfson first started seriously talking about gay marriage, the idea was considered completely ridiculous. Even sympathetic law professors told him it was not a worthwhile goal.
Why such resistance?
Because the prevailing zeitgeist, the cultural overstory, was still heavily shaped by sources like David Rubin's 1969 bestseller, Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Sex, which, basically pathologized homosexuality, treated it as an illness or a deviation. That was the cultural air people breathed.
And that sentiment persisted for a long time. I remember the political climate in the early 2000s.
Oh, yeah. By 2004, things looked bleak for activists. President George W. Bush gave that speech supporting a constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage. Even a liberal senator like Dianne Feinstein was saying publicly that pushing for marriage equality was too much, too fast, too soon.
So the activists must have felt like they were facing a long uphill battle.
They absolutely did. Most predicted it would take another 20, maybe even 40 years of struggle to achieve marriage equality nationwide. Gloom had really set in.
Yet, within just a decade after that low point, public opinion completely flipped.
It did. Opposition to gay marriage just seemed to wither away. It was described as the most significant shift in American public opinion on a major social issue in a lifetime. And it surprised even the activists themselves. They were caught off guard by the speed of the change.
So what happened? What changed the overstory so quickly? It wasn't one big miniseries like Holocaust?
No, it was much more subtle. And this is where entertainment television played a quiet but revolutionary role. Contrast the explicit message of Holocaust with the slow, incremental changes wrought by sitcoms and dramas.
Like what kind of shows?
Well, early attempts at sympathetic portrayals, like the 1992 TV movie Doing Time on Maple Drive, still kind of reinforce the old rules, even while trying to be empathetic.
What were the old rules for portraying gay characters?
Generally, gay characters were peripheral to the main story. Their sexuality was always presented as their defining and complicating fact. It was always a problem to be solved within the narrative. In Maple Drive, for instance, the main gay character, Matt, has a suicide attempt directly linked to his hidden sexuality. His identity was framed as a source of crisis.
Okay, so still problematic, even if well-intentioned.
Right. But then came Will and Grace in 1998. And this show, despite some initial criticism from within the gay community for being perhaps too ordinary or nothing queer about queer television.
Because Will was sort of conventionally handsome and maybe didn't challenge stereotypes enough for some.
Exactly. Critics pointed out he was somewhat straight acting, there was very little on-screen gay intimacy, but crucially, Will and Grace quietly broke all those old rules that Dow described.
How did it break the rules?
First, the gay characters, Will and Jack, were absolutely central to the narrative. It wasn't a show about straight people with a gay friend on the side. Second, their sexuality was not presented as a problem to be solved. It was just a fact about them. And third, crucially, you saw gay people interacting normally with other gay people, not just existing in isolation within a straight world.
It normalized it just by portraying it as normal life.
Precisely. It was revolutionary in its very normalcy. The creators even joked later that they slowly fed this gay conspiracy to the American public week after week. They portrayed Will as just a funny, successful, endearing man, capable of loving and being loved, normal, and he happens to be gay.
So that constant low-level exposure shifted the cultural background radiation.
That's the idea. This subtle, consistent normalization, night after night, in millions of homes, fundamentally shifted the overstory. It made the whole concept of gay lives, and by extension gay marriage, feel familiar, understandable, and ultimately acceptable to a much wider audience.
And this connects back to Sentila's tipping point idea.
Absolutely. Think about it. The gay marriage movement was steadily getting closer and closer to victory throughout the 2000s, building support, winning legal battles. But because change often happens abruptly at that 25% or 33% mark, it felt like they were losing right up until the moment the dam broke.
Because the big shift hadn't happened yet, even though the groundwork was laid.
Exactly. The evidence that the cultural tide was turning, that the overstory was being rewritten, was literally being broadcast right in front of them on shows like Will and Grace. But connecting those cultural dots to political reality was incredibly difficult in the moment.
It's hard to accept that a sitcom could be that influential, maybe.
It seems too simple, right? The idea that there is some amorphous, distant canopy overhead that casts a shadow on all of us down below, and that the clue to that overstory can be found in a television sitcom simply seems too hard to accept. But the evidence suggests that's precisely what happened. These cultural narratives matter enormously.
Okay, so we've seen overstories, monocultures, tipping points. Finally, let's explore what might be the most, unsettling reality of epidemics. Their profound asymmetry.
Yeah, this is the idea that they're often driven by a surprisingly, even shockingly small number of individuals or factors. It's not evenly distributed at all.
And the Biogen Conference COVID outbreak is a prime example of this, isn't it?
A terrifyingly stark example. February 2020, Marriott Long Wharf Hotel in Boston. Biogen holds a leadership retreat, about 175 attendees.
It's like a standard corporate event.
Except this single event, traced through genetic sequencing of the virus, led to over 300,000 subsequent COVID infections across the U.S. and even internationally. All linked back to a unique genetic signature of the virus, C2460, that first appeared at that conference.
300,000 cases. From one conference of 175 people. How is that even possible?
Well, that's a mystery.
That's right.
It was completely unfathomable to public health researchers at first. If COVID only spread through direct contact, like droplets from coughs and sneezes landing directly on someone, how could one or even a few people infect hundreds of others in just a 2-day conference? It seemed impossible logistically.
You can't cough on that many people.
Right. But this is where the aerosol scientists, people like Richard Rissenpart and David Edwards, came in with a different understanding. Their revelation was key.
What did they understand differently?
They knew that COVID wasn't just spreading through droplets, it was primarily airborne, spreading through tiny aerosol particles generated not just by coughing or sneezing, but crucially, just by talking and even breathing, especially in enclosed, poorly ventilated spaces.
And these particles hang in the air.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They can stay aloft for potentially an hour or more, and significantly they found that the louder one speaks, the more aerosol particles are produced.
So someone giving a presentation, talking loudly,
could be producing vastly more particles than someone sitting quietly. This led directly to the concept of superspreaders in disease transmission. It fits perfectly with this older idea called the law of the few.
The law of the few, what's that?
It's the principle that in many phenomena, a very small percentage of contributors account for a huge percentage of the effect. The classic example is from environmental science. Donald Stedman's research on car emissions in Denver.
What did he find?
He found that just 5% of the cars on the road were responsible for a whopping 55% of the total air pollution. Not an even distribution at all. A tiny fraction did most of the damage.
So the same applies to disease.
It seems so. In measles outbreaks, for instance, researchers noticed that the index case, the first person infected, could sometimes be an order of magnitude, like 10 times more infectious than the people they subsequently infected. Some people just spread it way more effectively.
And the aerosol scientists figured out why.
They started to. Risenpart and Edwards specifically studied speech superemitters. These are individuals who, for reasons that are still unclear, maybe they have more elastic or viscous saliva, maybe dehydration plays a role, but they exhale orders of magnitude more aerosol particles when they speak compared to others.
Orders of magnitude. Like how much more?
In one study, they found an individual who exhaled an astonishing 3,545 particles per liter of air while speaking. That was over 20 times more particles than the low spreaders in the same study.
20 times more.
Yeah. So now picture our hypothetical Mr. Index at the Biogen conference. Maybe he flew in, so he's a bit dehydrated. He's excited, giving a loud, enthusiastic presentation in that stuffy hotel ballroom.
Unknowingly unleashing millions and millions of these tiny virus-laden aerosol particles into the air.
Exactly. Suddenly that singular event spreading to hundreds and then leading to 300,000 downstream infections becomes tragically understandable. It's not just about the virus, it's about the right person in the right environment with the right or wrong physiological characteristics. A potent combination.
Wow, that asymmetry is stark. And this applies to other crises too, right? Like the opioid epidemic.
Absolutely. The opioid crisis is another devastating example of asymmetry and also of how different overstories or regulations can lead to vastly different outcomes. Jessica Ho's research showed the opioid crisis is fundamentally an American problem. The U.S. overdose rate catastrophically dwarfs those in other comparable high-income countries.
So that's like large area variation on a national scale.
Precisely. The U.S. had a different environment, a different regulatory overstory compared to other countries, but even within the U.S. there was variation.
Like California.
Exactly. California had the Madden overstory. Back in the 1930s, this zealous narcotics enforcer named Paul Madden implemented a state law requiring triplicate prescriptions for opioids.
Triplicate, what did that mean?
It meant every single opioid prescription written had to be done on a special form with 2 carbon copies. One went to the pharmacy, one stayed with the doctor, and crucially, one went straight to Madden's office, the State Narcotics Bureau.
So they had a record of every single prescription.
Every single one. This allowed Madden to easily identify the few rogue doctors who were vastly overprescribing. He could see the patterns immediately. He busted guys like Dr. Nathan Hausman, who prescribed morphine to one patient continuously for 17 years and then conveniently inherited her entire estate when she died.
Unbelievable. So this triplicate system acted as a check.
A powerful check. It created an overstory of accountability and scrutiny in California that kept its opioid crisis relatively contained compared to other states for decades.
But then Purdue Pharma came along with OxyContin.
Right. Purdue made a crucial shift. Their earlier drug, MS-Contin, had acetaminophen mixed in, which acted as a kind of governor's switch, take too much, and the acetaminophen causes liver damage, limiting abuse potential. OxyContin removed that safeguard. It was pure, potent oxycodone, designed for extended release, but easily crushable for immediate, intense effect.
And they marketed it aggressively.
Extremely aggressively. And here's where the asymmetry and targeting come in, aided by consultants like McKinsey. McKinsey advised Purdue to basically abandon broad, inefficient sales efforts.
And focus where?
Instead, they should laser target the superspreader doctors. They literally identified physicians they called the core and the supercore, the small percentage of doctors who wrote the vast majority of opioid prescriptions. And crucially, they focused these efforts overwhelmingly on states without triplicate prescription laws.
Like Tennessee.
Exactly. In states like Tennessee, Purdue increased its sales calls to these targeted high prescribers 5-fold. These doctors, the analysis suggested, often weren't wired like most doctors. They seemed unusually willing to believe Purdue's marketing claims, like the absurdly low addiction risk figures they were pushing.
Can you give an example?
One doctor, Michael Rhodes, met with Purdue sales reps 126 times. In 2007 alone, he wrote 297 prescriptions just for OxyContin. He was a super spreader, enabled by the system.
And the consequence of this targeted super spreading.
The consequence was an absolute tragedy. OxyContin got an extra decade of life on the market, fueling massive waves of addiction. When Purdue finally reformulated the pill in 2010 to make it harder to crush and abuse,
People just switch.
millions just switched to cheaper, readily available heroin, and then, inevitably, to even more potent synthetic opioids like fentanyl. This direct line, fueled by targeting superspreader doctors in permissive environments, contributed heavily to the nearly 70,000 Americans dying annually from opioid overdoses by the early 2020s.
And the accountability for Purdue and the Sackler family who ran it.
Well, when the Sacklers testified before Congress, Kate Sackler infamously denied any personal culpability. She used that classic passive voice, saying the product has been associated with abuse as if it just happened somehow.
But the forensic analysis shows something different.
The forensic analysis reveals a deliberate strategy. A company, aided by sophisticated consultants, actively leveraging the law of the few, the superspreader doctors, within a specific permissive overstory, the lack of triplicate laws in certain states, to maximize profits, knowingly fueling a national catastrophe. It's a chilling intersection of all these concepts.
So wrapping this all up, what does this deep dive really tell us?
Well, we've journeyed through the hidden mechanics of social epidemics. We've really seen how pervasive and powerful these invisible overstories are, haven't we? Quietly shaping everything from how doctors practice medicine in one town versus another, to how entire cultures think about massive social issues like the Holocaust or gay marriage.
Yeah, that background narrative is key. And we've explored the magic third and the magic quarter. It's fascinating that tipping points aren't just vague ideas. They can be quantifiable. These moments where just a small shift in group proportion can completely transform a dynamic.
Right, whether that's on a corporate board trying to get past tokenism, or in a classroom impacting student achievement, or even in engineering the demographics of an elite university, those numbers really matter.
And finally, we've had to confront that uncomfortable truth about superspreaders and the law of the few, that a tiny fraction of actors, whether it's polluting cars, people exhaling virus particles, or doctors writing prescriptions, can drive a truly disproportionate amount of a problem, often with absolutely devastating consequences.
It's a stark reminder of the asymmetry in the world.
The good news, though, maybe, is that these aren't presented as just random, uncontrollable forces of nature. The book suggests the tools needed to understand and maybe even control or mitigate an epidemic are often literally sitting on the table right in front of us.
Exactly. It really comes down to recognizing the patterns, understanding these underlying mechanisms, the overstories, the proportions, the few, and then consciously choosing how we as individuals and societies engage with them. We don't have to be passive victims of these contagions.
We can pick up the tools ourselves.
Yeah.
Which leads to a final provocative thought, maybe?
Go for it.
Consider this. If we as a society are constantly subject to these invisible overstories, and we're constantly influenced by the disproportionate actions of the few, are we truly making our own choices most of the time? Or are we, more often than we realize, simply part of a larger unseen contagion?
That's a deep question. And maybe the follow-up is, what overstory are you, the listener, contributing to, knowingly or unknowingly, in your own community right now? What song are you singing?
Something to think about. Thank you so much for tuning in to Daily Review. We truly appreciate you joining us for your daily dose of literary exploration. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue to share these amazing books with you. If you're enjoying what you hear, please consider taking a moment to subscribe, rate, like, and comment on any of the platforms you're listening from. This really helps support our channel and allows us to get better and bring you even more great content. If today's review sparked your interest and you're ready to dive into a copy of the book, please consider using the link in our description to make your purchase. Not only does it make it easy for you to get your hands on the book, but it also directly supports our channel and the author, allowing us to keep bringing you more great content. Thanks again for being a part of the Daily Review community.